Welcome to this week's Treasury Career Corner podcast, where I interview Treasury professionals about their Treasury careers. Each and every week, I talk to them about how they've built their careers, where they are now, where they see both themselves and the Treasury profession going to next. Let's get on with the show. In this week's show, delighted to be joined by a good old friend of mine, Johan Nystedt, the founder and president of Nystedt Enterprise Solutions, LLC. Well, the group itself provides advisory technology services to enterprise risk management clients. Prior to founding the firm, Johan was actually the SVP of Finance for RR Donnelley, where he headed up M&A, investor relations, and corporate FP&A. Before that, which is where actually I met Johan over the odd beer or three or several. Anyway, move on. He was the chief risk officer, treasurer, head of IR at Conagra. In addition, he's had many other senior roles throughout the years. That's what we're going to deep dive in a minute. But we're going to take Johan back to the dim, distant past. We'll then talk through his career, where he and why he started up this firm and where it's going to go to. And then we'll, as always, in each week's show, we'll talk about the future. Particularly, I think that's very much linked to what Johan's doing as well. So I'll shut up. It's Johan's story. Over to you, sir. Take us back to the beginning of your career and how you discovered finance and then treasury. Back to you, sir.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate that. I actually started a couple of companies in Europe, in Sweden predominantly, even before I came to the United States quite some time ago. When I came over to the United States, I had the chance to work at Philip Morris, nowadays Altria, which was exciting to me. I just finished my MBA from Stockholm School of Economics. I came to the United States. I looked at this big business. They were in all sorts of interesting consumer product areas beyond tobacco. They were heavily invested in food space, Miller Beer. They had a capital corporation, etc. So that really allowed me to go from the type of startup companies that I was engaged with in the 80s and 90s to go to the first kind of conglomerate after that. So it was really a way to gain additional experience by going to some big businesses that I found to be very interesting. And then Mike from Philip Morris, I went on to Kraft Foods. Mm-hmm. The reason for that was that I was heavily engaged in the Kraft Foods IPO while still being with Altria. This was back in 2001 or so. And on the heels of being engaged, being part of a core team working on the Kraft IPO in 2001, later on when the board determined to spin off Kraft entirely from Altria, was asked by the team at Kraft to join them to build and staff Treasury for Kraft. Those were my first couple of steps after I came to the United States.
Okay. And Johan, did you know Treasury then, or was it all new to yourself, or what was the background?
I didn't. So at Altria, I started to work in M&A. So I wasn't at the very beginning directly involved in Treasury, M&A and strategic planning. But I joined Treasury at Altria in 2001 or so. It was just a natural progression. They had the sense that it's good to kind of help to rotate people, move people along, and that was certainly very much appreciated by myself as well. I always found it to be really helpful to become as broad as you can. I think for me, it was always exciting to, go from one area to the other area. And I think the companies where I've been working at, certainly facilitated that as well for me. And that was really exciting.
And, you then kicked into, Treasury. Well, a good move with Kraft Foods. Now, I know the group, you know the group. Some of our listeners may not know the group. If you can, give people a bit of an insight, because then that influenced a number of the things that you sort of took part in, things like everything through to, Cadbury's and various other bits. Tell us about Kraft Foods, and then we'll move on through gently into Levi and things like that.
Sounds good. So Kraft Foods is one of the biggest global food companies in the world. Back when I joined Kraft Foods, as I mentioned, it was just being spun off by Altria, the previous owner. prior to the spin-off, there had already been an IPO where 20% or so of Kraft was listed on the public market space. We put together, before the spin, the capital structure of Kraft, the debt rate, credit ratings, etc. They had their own credit facility that we established. And then at the time of the actual spin, after the IPO in 2007, 2008, that's when Kraft became its standalone company. They operate in, way over 100 markets, countries around the world. They own all sorts of products, in snacks to, all sorts of food businesses. I was engaged in Treasury and M&A for Kraft, so I had a chance to be part of a number of divestitures, acquisitions, and I would say Kraft itself is kind of a product of a whole number of corporate development activity, inorganic activity in its past.
And then you made the move so that was based in lovely Illinois, and you then made the move to Levi. How did that come about, and what a move that was? So talk us through.
It was a really interesting progression for me. So at the time, we are now somewhere in 2010, 2011 timeframe, Kraft had just acquired Cadbury, the UK chocolatier, in a really interesting transaction. I think there's been a lot written about it. I was in the midst of it. It was maybe not the friendliest acquisition of all times. There was a lot of reluctance, I think, from the Cadbury side and among public at large in the UK to kind of protect the crown jewel from Kraft acquiring it. But it was a really interesting acquisition because of how complex it was. But once we had that done and the Cadbury was successfully acquired and the integration looked to be well on its way, from a pure treasury perspective, I felt a little bit like I was, a little bit of twiddling my thumbs, because clearly Kraft was going to nurse its balance sheet for quite some time after this big acquisition of this fine UK company. So when I was approached by one of the recruiting firms about this treasurer job at Levi Strauss on the West Coast in San Francisco, I thought, hey, that could be really exciting. I've been living on the East Coast of the United States. I've been living in the middle of the United States. What about going to the West Coast of the United States and experience California with my family? So that's what we did, because it was, again, interesting. I always thought it was important to push myself. I think important for anybody to push themselves out of their comfort zone. Levi Strauss represented a totally different industry versus craft and food. It also allowed me for the first time to work for a below investment grade company. At the time, Levi's was rated single B, I believe. And that by itself was exciting because, you really get more. I mean, cash is king everywhere, but if you have a single B rating, I think your priorities shift a little bit. And they had a so-called ABL, revolving credit facilities, an asset-backed facility because of its credit rating. So that was exciting to learn more about. And also the fact that for Levi, I had the chance to go beyond Treasury. I was a treasurer, but go beyond Treasury to assume a couple of other finance areas as well. So those were the key drivers.
And you made that move before then making the move to Conagra. And again, so you went Midwest, straight across West Coast, and you did 4 or 5 years with Levi. And then, the Windy City dragged you back, kicking and screaming. What happened?
Yeah, so you're correct. I think I spent about 5 years with Levi Strauss on the West Coast. Great 5 years, not only from a professional perspective, but also to live with my wife and kids on the West Coast for a while. Certainly appreciated that. What kind of drew me back to the Midwest is that Conagra, I found out that Conagra Brands was going to move its headquarters from Omaha, Nebraska to Chicago, and I connected with the CFO there at the time. And I said, hey, I'm hearing that you guys are going to move your headquarters from Nebraska to Chicago. I've been in the food space in the past. I kind of like it when to be part of corporate restructurings and corporate initiatives, because it tends to provide for a lot of good stuff to do and learn. So I contacted them. I think it was on Tuesday. By Friday the same week, I had my interviews with that CFO and the CEO and a few others, and I was really excited about it because of the prospect of, again, being engaged in a little bit of corporate history for that company. So that drew me back to the Midwest.
Amazing. And again, I know Conagra, we both do, and things like that. What was that like? And sort of, again, from a treasury perspective, you've just mentioned there, and I think it's interesting, you had food groups and sort of commodities, that sense, then went through Levi, which is more apparel, and then back to food. What drew you back by the free lunches?
I actually kind of looked to expand my industry experience, everything else equal. Clearly going back to food was known territory from the industry perspective. And there were many exciting things about Conagra, even though back to the food space, that I still felt that this is going to be challenging, which is a good thing. In particular, when you move the headquarters, and it wasn't like all the functions moved. A lot of finance was still going to stay in Omaha, Nebraska. Still is there today, as far as I know. So Treasury, for example, the piece I oversaw Treasury, Investor Relations, and later on became the Chief Risk Officer on top of that. But from a Treasury perspective, we wanted to have the debt capital markets team, so the capital structure team in Chicago. We had some very, very strong cash management teams, credit teams, and insurance teams that stayed in Omaha. No reason to move them, as it was working out really well. But we decided that we needed to have the investor relations functions in Chicago, close to the CEO. So, providing an opportunity to really think about the different treasury and treasury-related areas, as well as investor relations, and kind of think about what talent do we have, where is it located now, and where does it make the most sense to have it in the future. And that was a really exciting exercise to go through, and worked out pretty well for them.
Well, then bring us to the next move, and RR Donnelley. So, that natural step, food, apparel, food, and then business communications and marketing. So, how did that come about? What was that? And what was that like for you in a difference of treasury? I know you and I spoke about this before, and we've talked about it over a beer or two. What was it like moving from, because I talked to someone the other day about how working in, say, FMCG or, a product you can touch, and a lot of the companies have different ways of approaching it, but you're going to quite a different business stream, as it were.
Yeah, no, that is correct. It's a different business stream. It's a different industry. But even though, as you work with a company, in the case of RR Donnelley, I was a senior vice president of finance, and my three main areas was M&A, heading up investor relations, and heading up corporate FP&A. Even though the way you do that and the outcome is industry dependent and dependent on the company size, the credit ratings, all sorts of factors, the approach of getting to the right answer tends to be fairly similar. For example, for Treasury, right, it's really important to look at the capital structure. It's really important to see, given the capital structure, what type of initiatives can you afford to conduct, and what can you not afford to do. And if you want to do something but you don't really have either the debt budget for that, or your debt constrained, or your risk constrained, then I think the job of Treasury folks is to then kind of help change the capital structure or help change the risk profile, so that these initiatives are doable. Now, that's going to depend a lot on the company itself. and a lot on the credit ratings, etc., and what risk appetite a company has. But the approach of getting to the right answer tends to be fairly similar. So for me, it wasn't really much of an issue to go into a different space. I went from, at Levi's, as that business really turned around. We went from single B at Levi's to double B, kind of starting to flirt with investment grade. But and Conagra was definitely investment grade, but RR Donnelley was in the single B rating space. So again, I could really fall back on my experiences from Levi Strauss and that capital structure, in kind of creating the capital structure and supporting the capital structure for RR Donnelley that was aligned with its strategic objectives.
And that was one of the things. You led the sale of the group back in 2022. What was that like for you in treasury terms? And, then bring us more up to date, if you like.
Just for full disclosure, RR Donnelley is at RR Donnelley, I was not responsible directly for treasury, right? The three areas were M&A, FP&A, and investor relations. But clearly, to your point, I worked extremely closely with the treasurer and all the folks in treasury, because when you engage in the types of M&A activity that I was heading up, obviously you need to work closely, very, very closely with treasury, both as it pertains to divestitures, when you have cash coming in because you sell something, as well as obviously acquisitions, because now you give up cash to buy something, and you have to be aligned with the treasury team because, we need to speak in a consistent fashion with the rating agencies about the rating agency impacts, especially at a company like RR Donnelley that is below investment grade. That was clearly very important. So, when I joined RR Donnelley back in 2019, before COVID, I thought it was a really interesting business because if you look at RR Donnelley, they spun off some of their key businesses back at the tail end of 2016. And the RR Donnelley today, the RR Donnelley where I worked, was really the remain co after them spinning off some really significant businesses, and really was more of a kind of an American quilt of different businesses. And that's what excited me about that M&A job, was that it was pretty clear that in joining RR Donnelley on the M&A side, it was pretty obvious that a lot of work could be done and probably would be done. And that's exactly what it was. A lot of corporate development activity, a lot of acquisitions we looked at, a lot of divestitures that we closed on, which then culminated with the sale of the entirety of what up until this year was a public company, and selling it to private equity in a transaction that was really viewed by Wall Street to be, very value enhancing, and therefore provided gains for the shareholders, which was great.
And then your latest sort of venture, can you bring us up to date? You and I talked about it as well, but for the guys that are listening today, that some people might be thinking themselves, I wonder if I could do this or take it, because I know you've got a passion very much for what you're doing now. I'm not going to do it. I'll let you do it. Explain what you're doing now, why, and where you see it fitting.
My new business, after the sale of RR Donnelley to private equity, I thought, what? I've been thinking about. I've been flirting with the idea of starting my own business now for quite some time. Frankly, at the tail end of working at Conagra, I started to really get ready to start my own business. Enterprise risk management has always been really, really exciting to me. That's why I was able to kind of become the chief risk officer at Conagra, for example, because I kind of like the idea, risk management has gone a long way. It's gone from, what I call once upon a time enterprise list management, a list with an L, where you kind of put together a list about risks and you hope that once you present it to the board or senior management, you hope nobody's going to ask you any questions about it because you had no depth to it, to real enterprise risk management with an R, which is very much connected into the strategic initiatives of the business. Real ERM goes way beyond just identifying and surveying and prioritizing risks. It's about creating really strong risk management action plans where you denote who's responsible for what and when should it happen and how are the different top risks connected to each other, to also extend to the concept of portfolio risk. And what I mean by that is that we measure the risk capacity. So risk capacity is when you look at the covenants, loan covenants, or bond covenants, or you look at the restrictions imposed by the rating agencies to maintain the type of credit rating you want to maintain. You can fairly easily measure how much risk capacity do you have. And then you can, once you know the risk capacity, given the ratings you're looking to stay within, in terms of thresholds, then you can look at, what risk am I actually taking? And I think the role of business is to take risk. No risk, no return, last time I checked. But it's also about not taking foolish risks. Don't take uncompensated risks or undercompensated risks. Look at risk almost like debt, right? I mean, debt is very near and dear to the hearts of anybody in Treasury because they tend to own cash and therefore they own debt. And debt and risk is kind of similar in a way. Not only are they both four-letter words, but also debt is not necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, we incur debt to get liquidity or cash to invest behind initiatives. Risk is very, very similar. Risk is something that we also incur as we launch new initiatives or we acquire businesses. We just need to make sure that we manage the risk, that we handle the risk, that we don't take too much of it. So risk is good. We just have to make sure that we control it. And that's what really drove me to start this business, because I think today the concept of debt and cash, of course, people get, and we speak about leverage and so forth, and below investment grade. But I think risk still has a long ways to go and really deserves to be anchored into the strategic plans of businesses.
Well, again, that's a nice segue. So in the future of Treasury, and obviously we're very Treasury focused. I know this is a wider remit with your venture, as it were. But why do you we'll link it to risk management. We'll also think about the other things that are happening within Treasury. What are you thinking those treasurers out there need to be thinking about? What are you thinking? Goodness, guys, this is where you can help, sort of thing. I don't want to make this a total sales pitch for yourself, but it can be a little bit of one. But explain to us again why this is important. We've had other guys, way back when ESG was coming up, and the guys got into that, which is very evident. Why do you think this is so important, would you say?
A couple of thoughts. One of the things that always impressed me with Treasury and Treasury professionals is that they are oftentimes called upon to go beyond the silo of Treasury to really be part of the whole finance function, and sometimes the entire, support the entirety of the enterprise function. I think that's one of the really interesting aspects with Treasury, is that they are oftentimes entrusted to kind of go into new areas where there is no current obvious owner. And I think enterprise risk management is one of those areas. I mean, clearly now with the pandemic and inflation and supply chain disruptions, enterprise risk management truly is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds right now. And I think for Treasury folks, I think enterprise risk management really is a great opportunity to be able to take something on that are truly going to bring them to the table where strategic decisions are being made at the company, where strategic plans are created. Because ERM includes, it's a very much linked to the strategic plan in that traditionally strategic plans was about, we're going to have point projections or point estimators about, the next 3 years, the next 5 years, this is going to be our profit. But what ERM does is to kind of firm that up a little bit by helping company to figure out the critical success factors, so-called must-believes in order to make that strategic plan really happen, and also kind of inventories the interdependencies of the different strategic initiatives and provides risk triggers that, hey, if the strategic plan was based on the assumption of inflation being 2% and now it's 7%, ERM kind of lays out what other aspects one should look at that are connected with, for example, a certain inflation assumption. So it provides whoever manages the ERM with a chance to be more directly linked, I think, to the strategic plan. So I think that's one aspect of ERM. That's interesting, of course.
Well, let me jump in. I want to ask, so we have a number of listeners from the Treasury Assistant level through to Global Treasurer. So if I'm a Treasury Assistant analyst listening today, you talk there, it's very high level. ERM, that's my treasurer's responsibility. What connection do I have it on a day-to-day basis? I'm doing my treasury dealing. Why is ERM of any significance to them, or is it just something they're studying their exams later and maybe one day they'll touch on it? How would you describe that to them?
That's a great question. I think, when you start out in finance, including treasury, some of the really important key aspects is to try to get to know the business, because it's first when you get to know the business that you can become a business partner, right? And we talk about that a lot about, treasury becoming more and more a strategic partner to the business. Getting to know the business is important. Getting to know the key people is important too, especially to start out. You need to kind of cultivate internal relationships as well as external relationships, and that's really important. And to then become this partner based on, having been able to understand the business a little bit and getting to know people. ERM, enterprise risk management, is a great tool to really add value, because if you know exactly what the next person knows, and if all the focus areas are the same, what are you adding? But if you embrace something as new and exciting as ERM, and you just look at that a little bit and try to provide that as your contribution to your business, as to how you can add value as a business partner to the business based on the business you learned, you looked at, and the people then you really have something to come with.
And then again, I really want to try and get under this for a more junior member of staff or treasury manager or something like that. I know that ERM, it sort of encompasses things like cyber and all these different risks to a business. How would you then say they're dragging you in? They're saying, actually, can you explain ERM to our operations team, or what effect it should have on them, or what they need to be thinking about in their day-to-day jobs? I know, again, you and I talked about this before. How would you sell it, present it? How would you explain to those guys that they need to keep it in the back of their minds, would you say?
Yeah, I think in its very simplest form, enterprise risk management is just to add the dimension of risk and uncertainty to the type of assessments or projections we tend to make. So, for example, if you are implementing, a new system, a new treasury management system, ERM could be taking a look at, well, we're getting this new treasury management system together, by being able to monitor and track cash much better, by being able to have better analytics about our debt. How did this, allow us to take on, since we're reducing the risk now because we have more insight in cash and the capital structure through our new TMS system, what type of risk reduction does that provide? Just to go from, or plans, for example, if you say, okay, my budget for 2023 calls for me to make a profit of $100 million, and then the next year, 24, 110. I mean, at the simplest level, what ERM does is to say, okay, got it. We think we're going to make 100 and then 110. But what are the potential outcomes, other outcomes behind that? I don't want to be geeky, but, what's the distribution and what's the realm of the possible? And if there is a really important assumption be it like you said in operations, maybe the plan is based on starting up another 7 plants somewhere, or maybe it's based on the company being able to penetrate the new market somewhere, then ERM in its simplest form is just to have a sense as to, okay, I get it. This is what the strategic plan calls for. But what are the key assumptions to make that happen? And what are the factors we should watch out for? Because if those critical success factors do not occur, the plan may be in danger, right? So I think at any level, at the analyst level, the manager level, just to think about, initiatives, not just like, initiatives that are supposed to provide a certain, profit down the road, but also kind of overlay the risk behind that and opportunities behind that to make projections, not just to be kind of point estimators, but just thinking about what are the risks and opportunities involved in the different initiatives. I think that is what ERM is at its core.
It was we not that far off the end of the show because we keep it to about half an hour, 40 minutes. If we go, Johan, and looking back over your career, we're going to put in the show notes, obviously, your LinkedIn profile, because I think it'd be great for people to connect to you, because this is exactly what they need to be thinking about, a lot of this ERM stuff coming through and everything else. But if you reflect back over that time, and before we give your top tips, if you like, as you reflect, what sort of advice would you give to some of the listeners today? Obviously, this is the Treasury Career Corner. You've had this amazing career so far in Treasury, and long may it continue. But what would you sort of push back to them and say, these are the kind of decisions you guys need to make? Or, what sort of, again, you moved, Midwest or East Coast-ish, right the way across West and back again. You weren't afraid to make that move. And I know that you and I have connected a number of times, but, maybe it's that. Or what other tips would you give to people, maybe?
Number one, I know it's oftentimes said, but I think there's a lot of truth behind it. Stay hungry. Get out of the comfort zone. In fact, as soon as you start to feel comfortable, it's probably time to, either within the existing company or a new company, do something new. I think we learn the most as humans when we are challenged and when we are outside our comfort zone. So that's number one. Get out of the comfort zone. When you're there, then do something else. Take some risk. Try to get to a new job, position, rotation inside the company, or think about external opportunities. That's number one. Number two, I think it's sometimes forgotten by Treasury people how great, how unique the Treasury work is, because it's one of the few areas in finance that truly can be quite external, right? I mean, how many areas of finance do you have where you have the chance of working with external stakeholders like, debt holders when you issue debt, banks when you work on cash management initiatives, credit rating agencies. You really have a lot of external interactions and the potential of a lot of external interactions in Treasury. And that is highly sought after in your organization. So if you want to become the strategic business partner, just by virtue of you naturally, likely having connections with the external community, that by itself is going to provide you quite a bit of value internally in your organization as well. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, at any stage of your career, early on or later on, really try to always understand, get to know the business and keep that up and tie connections with people, know the people, and be aware. Change is everywhere. The one thing that is not going to change is that change will continue to happen. So, be aware of that. Try to contribute to it. Digital transformation, I think it's really important.
And would that be your wrap up? Or, I mean, as I said, I didn't mean to be unfair there, but, we'll put your LinkedIn details in the show notes. But as you reflect back on it, or, think about, some of the future, is there anything else that, you think, this is what these guys listening today, you've heard a couple of the shows yourself before, that, any final takeaways that they should have as well as those, because I think they were great.
Yeah, final takeaway would simply be, I truly feel that enterprise risk management is the entry ticket into strategic discussions and being part of the room where being in the room where it happens. So it's one of those tools you can use to really have the chance to be more involved in strategic decision making. And I don't think you need to be at very top level in Treasury to do that. I think ERM is going to be just like technology and foundational Excel skills or whatever was in the past. It's going to be the path in.
Yeah, amazing. Well, as I say, I'll put Johan's details in the show notes. I know he's a great guy to have in your network, and I can't wait to see him later on this year. Hopefully, maybe AFP or maybe other bits as well. We'll be across in Chicago as well. It's amazing to talk to you, sir, and yeah, just looking forward to it. Really, catching up and good luck with this new venture. I think you're bound to do well because we know each other, and I know how commercial you are. And I think anybody, again, you want to sort of talk ERM, connect with Johan. He's definitely someone to have in your network. So, amazing. Thank you, sir. And look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Hello, it's Mike here again. I hope you enjoyed this week's show. If you did, then maybe you want to follow the show or subscribe, depending on where you listen, whether that's iTunes, Spotify, or another great place to listen to the show from. It's totally free and means that you'll be the first to see each and every week when we release a new show. And maybe whilst you're there, you could even leave a quick review. Reviews and ratings are among the most important metrics for a podcast to effectively rank. And as you can probably appreciate, the podcast is a lot of hard work to produce every week. It'd be amazing. Just take, say, 20 seconds, leave a quick review of my amazing guests and their great career stories. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks very much, and I can't wait to see you soon.